humanity requires love. Humanity does. All of us require love. We yearn for love. We yearn for unity, not division, right? But listen, demons yearn for division. They yearn for fighting. The same way you love to have somebody close to you, you love unity, you love joy, the same way you love that. Demons love separation. Demons love death. Demons love the opposite of what you love, right? So when the world starts getting like it is now, and everybody's dividing, that's a telltale sign that demonic activity is up to a great height. In the Bible, that's called iniquity, is up to a great height. People are so easily beset and compromised by their own emotions because they don't believe the biblical narrative anymore. They don't believe the scientific narrative anymore. They believe a suspicious narrative now, right? So if any sound doctrine out there, right, they're not going to believe it because it has too much soundness to it. They want the suspicious stuff. They want something that will always speak against somebody else. They want the divisive issue. That's what they accept. Being unified right now is boring to a lot of people, right? And people, once again, are skeptical of one another. So these same repeating cycles happen over and over again, which means demonic activity is at a pretty big high. Anytime you have large-scale division, demons are involved every single time. And this takes place right before the fall of kingdoms, right? To use this as an example, too, dreams before the flood. Dreams, people had dreams. You know, you go back in history, you start reading, people had dreams of seeing the roots of trees in the skies, right? A lot of people documented that back in those days. They documented seeing the bottom of trees. Now, why would a bunch of people all of a sudden, right, begin to see floating animals in the sky and the roots of trees? I believe one of the descriptions was the animals were running in the sky and choking at the same time, right? People thought they were in the sky. Well, we know now that they were underwater. They didn't know that back then. Think about that, right? They started having these dreams about tree roots, trees being in the skies and animals running in the skies, choking. But they didn't know that was water. And then all of a sudden the flood came. Flood came destroying much on the face of the earth, right? Same thing with Egypt. During the time, it's documented in Egypt, they'd had historians there. And in Egypt, they had dreams of the sky on fire, right? This is when the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. They had dreams of fire. They had dreams of people in the streets doing, just fighting each other. They had dreams of lawlessness, and it bothered the pharaohs. And their wise magicians they had in there. And sure enough, then the Exodus came. Those prophecies were fulfilled. Egypt was totally destroyed, and the Israelites were freed. And then even in the Bible, as the prophets were sent, you notice that during a time of, let's just say, exile, you're going to have a group of people, normally, that do not agree with the common person's insight. It happens every single time. It's when the people begin to rebel against their governments, against their rulers, that marks a countdown to a great, massive destruction. And that's happening now. What do you have now? And it's like clockwork. People are standing against their leadership. It's just like Afghanistan. Now, a lot of people are frightened to talk about these divisive subjects. I am not, because I don't agree with the average person. But, for example, Afghanistan. If we would have stayed in Afghanistan, I remember when President Trump was in power, everybody was like, yes, it's time to bring our troops home. And President Trump said, yes, we're going to bring them home. We're going to bring them home. It's time for them to go home. But when he said that, and after the generals gave their report, there was really no way to get out of that mess in there. There was no way to do that, right? The factors they had to deal with was a drop in morale of the soldiers, because they knew that the media would get hold of it and hold it against President Trump. So they quit talking about it. You remember that? He said that, then he stopped talking about it. He began to work behind the scenes, and so that nobody else would really focus on that, because in the eyes of civilians, you're always going to be wrong. They're always going to point the finger. They're going to find something to point the finger at. It's a shame, but that's what they do. They're not supportive of certain things, right? They're not supportive. Now, they found out what President Trump, he wrote the letter. He said there is no way to exit that country unless you do it harshly. That's exactly what he said. So either way, people were going to die, because here's what you don't know, and here's what they won't publish. There were attacks that were coming upon those bases, all of them, and it was going to consume a lot of the Middle East. We're not talking about small attacks. No. We're talking about somebody who has already usurped an army, and we're not talking about Taliban. Forget about the Taliban. Those are small fry. No, we're talking about greater forces had mounted up, and they were about to start something. And the only way to get out of that and to save probably millions of lives, I'll say right now, definitively millions of lives were saved, right, through that exit. Millions. If we would have stayed, we would have lost 50, 60,000 troops of our people in less than a year. You know what? We, because of the media, people are not seeing this right. They're just not. Listen, many soldiers over there, they know they lost hundreds of people all the time. We're talking about every single week. Every single week. They know that. You don't know that. So when you're losing soldiers like that, right, eventually that number's going to get out. Exactly how many people we lost there, just like Vietnam. You remember Vietnam? There was no safe way to pull out, because you have the enemy, no matter what, waiting in the back. They're waiting in the background, waiting to assault and attack. The only right way to get out of Afghanistan would be by fighting, right? That's it, by fighting. In fact, did you notice that ISIS showed up? ISIS showed up a little bit later. They were not there before because they didn't suspect we would leave so soon. We caught them off guard. Then they mounted up about 300,000 of their soldiers, and they were about to start some stuff out there. See, they listen, they can't tell you the whole story because there's still operations ongoing, right? It'd be like naming every CIA agent over there and said, well, you know, we still got 200 here and 1,000 over here and 5. You can't do that. The U.S. right now is engaged in over 100 conflicts, and they don't say a word. Why? Because when civilians get the information, they're not going to understand the ins and outs of that tactical information. All civilians are going to have is an opinion, and it's not going to be right in the eyes of civilians because they don't have the whole story. And it's a national security problem to tell the whole story. Because if somebody told the whole story, the operatives would be given up. If that happened, you'd see 100 million dead tomorrow morning if that happened. Okay, so that can never take place, right? Is it distasteful? You better believe it. But it's also a taste of something large scale is about to come. See, because all this is mentioned in the Word of God in this way. When humanity gets to the point where they are no longer appreciative of things, they start pointing the finger too much, God will abase the entire race of humanity. I'll say that one more time. When all people do is point and assign blame, God will abase the entirety of humanity because the appreciation is gone. See, you may not know this, but people over the years have stopped. They used to do this when something like that happened, like Vietnam. The same thing happened in Vietnam. The exact same thing happened in Vietnam. You had people over here protesting the war, throwing everybody under the bus, right? And when we left, you know what? Vietnam today is how it is because of that show, that demonstration of force. Had nobody gone into Vietnam, Vietnam would have taken over the whole province over that area. That dissidence would have spread. It was like a cancer, a virus, right? But it ended badly because it was televised. You'd be shocked at how many missions end that way. Just like Afghanistan. They just don't publicize it. And when it's not publicized, no one complains because they don't know. You see, some of the soldiers over there, and a lot of soldiers right now, are highly disheartened, but they're hard-pressed to find a better way to exit in the Middle East. You got to remember the planning for this exit took place. It's been going on for about 3 years. You don't strip equipment like they did. You don't do that within a 4-month period. That's impossible. You have to dismantle some very volatile things. That takes over a year to do strategically because you have to take sensitive pieces of equipment and get them out of country before anybody suspects anybody is leaving anywhere, right? And that's exactly what they did. You cannot destroy them unless you risk destroying, a billion people. You can't do that. You contaminate the entirety of the land. So you have to strategically get that out of that country and bring it back to wherever you are. That takes months to do that. Months. So the planning for this has been going on for more than 2.5 years, 3 years. I hope you understand that. 2.5, 3 years, this plan has been in play. Everything has been, if they would have stayed, if they were not to leave anywhere, about right now, you'd notice something awful happening in the Middle East. You'd notice a lot of innocent children being lined up and shot to death. You need to understand the mindset of certain individuals over there. They would kill 1 billion children to prove a point to the West. I hope you know that. The very presence of the U.S. in that country is a smack in the face to all of those who are militant Islam individuals. Notice I said militant Islamic individuals. And they would line 1 billion of their own children up and behead them in view of cameras just to demonstrate a point. Because they don't like the West. Try not to forget that. If they get a chance to stab anybody in the back from the West, they'll do it. Why? Because it's part of what they believe in. And I don't care who you are. You're not going to fight faith. You can't even fight faith with a nuclear missile. You cannot do it. You can't do it. I'm thankful. I'm thankful that we didn't lose 30,000 of our soldiers in doing what we did. I'm thankful because a whole lot more could have died. It could have been a massive explosion by some very powerful ordnance, and I'm thankful the numbers were minimal. In fact, for that week, there were more people that died that week. And that day only represented 2% of who died that total week. See, people were dying over there anyway. Hope you know that. A lot of stuff soldiers face over there. And it was one of those situations. Because we are politically torn in this country. Because we are immobilized, and we have been for the last 10, 15 years in the USA. People are going to point and say that was just the wrong way to do it. They're always going to do that. But was there a right way? Is there a right way to give the country back to a people who, when intimidated, are going to fold anyway? Is there a right way? See, they already knew as soon as the U.S. left, as soon as Allied forces left, there was a big chance that they would give up their government and all equipment over into the hands of the Taliban. They already suspected that. So what were we supposed to do? Continue to send our children over there to die? Knowing that they're not going to follow suit with what we set in order anyway? See, that's what was found out. No matter what we did, it was going to happen. If we stayed there 50 more months and took a piece of equipment out every single day, what would have happened was we would have got down to a number where they could overwhelm us, and then all of them would have died. That's called a no-win scenario. That's what soldiers are for. Soldiers do those things that nobody else is going to do. Soldiers are called to do a terrible thing. Young men and women who are trained to do the unthinkable. That's why I'm always in the corner for pay raises for soldiers. Always. That's why I'll never take them for granted. Because I remember being in there. And I have never had a parade coming home from any mission. Because hardly anybody knew about it. So I totally missed out on that. No thank you, no anything. None of that stuff. How about that? And I was always willing to stay behind so some civilian could continue to have their freedom